Hey guys, tonight we travel deep into the heart of 17th century Central Africa. Lush, humid, and thrumming with drums somewhere in the distance. You're standing barefoot on warm, beaten earth. The air is thick with the scent of charcoal, plantain, and marula. Nearby, someone sips palm wine from a calabash gourd, while a parrot shrieks indifferently from a woven cage. You're in the royal courtyard of Ndongo, a kingdom of fierce elegance and endless negotiation, where power moves as silently as the moon. And in the shadows of that courtyard, beneath fluttering cloth banners and the watchful eyes of statues, carved from river-washed stone, our story begins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, feel free to post your location and what time you're tuning in from. I love knowing where this little sleepy community stretches to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the capital of Kabasa, just outside the Great Kwanza River, where Queen Nzinga's people hold court with a mixture of pride, patience, and a splash of suspicious curiosity. It's the early 1600s. Europeans are slowly invading coastlines like a mold creeping under the bark of an ancient tree. But inland, for now, Ndongo still feels strong. Its red clay compounds, rhythmic marketplaces, and scent of roasted cassava promise stability. That promise, of course, will turn out to be a fib. The Mbundu people, Nzinga's people, live in rhythm with rain and fire. Their palaces are not palaces like Versailles, but living organisms. Courtyards open to the sky, walls coated with ancestral symbols, breezeways always humming with the murmurs of midwives, warriors, and rainmakers. In the center of it all is the royal family. Not yet crowned, not yet armored in legend, just a tangle of relatives sharing palm wine under mango trees. Queen Nzinga hasn't been born yet, but tonight you rest near the fire as her future begins to whisper through the leaves. Her father, King Kiluwanji Kiasamba, is a man of presence. His voice doesn't boom, it rumbles, like distant thunder wrapped in silk. He's both king and negotiator, warrior and dancer. He rules over a shifting terrain, not just of geography, but of politics. Portuguese traders haunt the coastline, like ghosts with muskets. Other African states rise and fall with unnerving speed. Every guest who arrives in Kabasa brings either a gift or a trap, sometimes both. Historians still argue whether Kiluwanji ever saw the Europeans as true allies or merely tools to buy time. Either way, he balances power with the grace of a tightrope walker sipping tea. The court around him is busy. Young men, learning to spear fish, older women telling stories through bead patterns, advisors constantly reweaving the net of alliances across Ndongo's provinces. It's in this world that Kiluwanji's wife, a quiet woman of fierce blood, goes into labor. And here's where the story tilts from royal chronicle to whispered legend. Nzinga is said to have been born with her umbilical cord wrapped tightly around her neck, so tightly in fact that many feared she wouldn't survive, but she did. Her first breath, according to some tales, came not in the cradle, but later, gasping in her mother's arms as the midwife chanted prayers to Kitambi, the spirit of balance. They name her Nzinga. In Kimbundu, it means to twist, or to turn, a reference to her birth, sure, but also, perhaps, a prophecy. You don't just emerge from a near strangling and not take that personally. You grow up sharp, you grow up strategic, you twist. From the very beginning, Nzinga is surrounded by contradictions. She's royal, but not necessarily destined for rule. She's cherished, but not necessarily safe. Her mother shields her from palace gossip, but her older siblings do not. They argue over fruit, hide knives in their compliments, and gossip louder than roosters. Nzinga, even as a child, watches. She learns. She watches how the elders carry themselves when foreigners arrive, how their smiles grow broader, but their hands always stay near their blades. She watches how her father listens more than he speaks. But when he does speak, everyone goes quiet like the wind has been plucked from the sky. She listens at night when the talking drums send messages across villages. Sometimes she repeats them out loud, scaring the kitchen staff. Not because she's wrong, but because she's right. At 5, she can recite the lineages of rival provinces. At 6, she can quote her grandmother's curses, word for word, except when adults are around. At 7, she sneaks sips of palm wine and says it tastes like smoky rain. Her family tolerates her eccentricities because, well, she's smart. And when you're smart in a royal family, you either become useful or dangerous. Nzinga chooses both, and yet, in these early days, there's peace, or at least a version of it. The fields yield millet and maize. The Kwanzaa River runs clear. The rains arrive mostly on time. At night, you hear the low hum of crickets, the burp of frogs, the thump of someone's dream drum echoing through the compound. You feel the warmth of the fire. You sip the wine. You wonder what it means to be born in a world where survival isn't just a gift. It's a test. Nzinga, asleep on a grass mat in the next room, doesn't know yet what storms are coming, but she'll be ready. You wake to the faint clang of metal on stone. Somewhere beyond the royal courtyard, a blacksmith is shaping something, maybe a blade, maybe a bracelet. That's the thing about this place. Beauty and danger are often hammered on the same anvil. Nzinga is no longer the tiny, twisted newborn from the midwife's stories. She's a walking contradiction in copper bracelets, part sharp-tongued child, part soft-spoken observer, and already the kind of person whose silences make people nervous. She's grown into a girl of quiet habits and sharper questions. The royal compound is her playground, but also her training ground. It's a place where laughter carries just as easily as threats, and everyone seems to speak in riddles unless they're whispering secrets behind their hands. You follow her to the back garden one morning, where she and her sisters sit grinding cassava into a paste so fine it nearly resembles milk. The air smells of crushed leaves and damp stone. Her sister Kifunji hums an old wedding song, but Nzinga is not humming. She's watching a line of ants carry off crumbs of dried yam, and then she's watching the servants carry off trays of fruit to visiting nobles, and then, suddenly, she's standing, because someone has just said the word Portuguese. You don't need to be older than 10 to understand what that means here. The Portuguese are not just traders, not anymore. They are a strange force from beyond the sea, wearing heavy clothes and crossing themselves like nervous birds. They speak of God and sugar in the same breath, and they seem to think every African chief is just waiting for a European handshake and a musket in exchange for trust. Historians still argue whether Nzinga met any Portuguese before adolescence, but it's certain that their presence hung over Ndongo like the rainy season, unavoidable, moody, and full of disease. By now, the Portuguese have clawed their way into Luanda, a growing coastal settlement built on trade, missions, and a whole lot of ambition. They're not just buying ivory anymore. They're buying people, selling them too. The transatlantic slave trade is well underway, and Ndongo's position, geographically, politically, spiritually, makes it both a target and a prize. Nzinga's father, King Kiluanji, tries to hold the line. He sends emissaries, he signs treaties, he breaks others. He plays a constant game of smile and sharpen your spear, and Nzinga watches. She's present at court gatherings where foreign priests try to explain the Holy Trinity using 3 mangoes and leave deeply confused. She's present when her father questions a Portuguese envoy about a shipment of iron tools that never arrived, and the envoy pretends not to understand the dialect, despite speaking it just fine the day before. She watches how her father tilts, his head, eyes narrowing, as if mentally subtracting the man's worth from the price of a canoe. Nzinga doesn't speak much at these meetings, not yet. But later, over roasted plantain, she mimics their accents and makes her sisters laugh so hard one nearly chokes. At night, Nzinga asks questions. How do the Portuguese keep arriving even though we tell them not to? Why do they say one thing and do another? Why do they keep drawing maps of land that isn't theirs? Her mother says they are like the river, always moving, always cutting new paths. Her brother says they are like ghosts who forgot how to die. Her father says nothing. He just stares into the fire and drinks slowly. Nzinga listens. She learns. And then, one season, she's old enough to travel with the court. You join her caravan as it rolls over cracked paths lined with palms and wildflowers. The sun is relentless, but Nzinga doesn't flinch. She rides beside her father, one hand casually resting on the saddle horn, the other shading her eyes as they approach a provincial village to negotiate a grain dispute. It's here she learns how to read people, the way someone bows too low, the way they mention their humble village exactly 7 times, the way every gift has strings and every silence hides a threat. She watches her father speak 3 languages in one sentence. He praises the chief's hospitality while reminding everyone within earshot that he commands 300 spears. He accepts a goat with a smile, then has it discreetly inspected for poison. Nzinga sees all of it, and more. There's a moment, just a flicker, when her father turns to her in front of the assembled elders and says, "What do you think, Nzinga? It's not a test, not entirely, but it is a shift." A subtle nod that she is no longer just a listener. She answers carefully, suggests a compromise over water rights. Her words are simple, but her tone is measured, calculated. The chief nods. The meeting ends peacefully. Her father says nothing on the ride home, but the next morning she finds a new necklace on her sleeping mat, a single carved bead strung on a leather cord. No one says who left it there. No one has to. Years pass like this, Nzinga growing taller, stronger, quieter, her knowledge becoming not just deep, but wide. She studies maps drawn by Portuguese hands and redraws them the right way. She learns which herbs cure fever and which ones only make you wish they did. She practices the art of speaking last and always sounding like she spoke first. But power, even in well-ordered kingdoms, is slippery. Her father is aging. Her brothers are growing bolder and crueler. Especially Mbande, her eldest half-brother. He's not her favorite. In fact, he might be the reason she sharpens her knives with such devotion. He doesn't like how their father listens to her, doesn't like her opinions, her reach, or the way servants seem to pause when she enters a room. She knows better than to challenge him. Yet. But something in her changes when she sees Mbande slap a court advisor for disagreeing. Not argue, slap. The sound echoes, and everyone laughs a little too quickly. Nzinga doesn't laugh. She files it away. You sit beside her that night under a spiny acacia. The stars are out, and the only sound is the breeze rattling dry seed pods. She says nothing for a long time. Then, almost to herself, "Power is patient. You drink your wine slowly, so does she." There's a storm building, not just in the sky, but in the palace halls, in the tight whispers between guards, in the subtle shift of footsteps in the courtyard. You feel it in the air, like the pressure just before rain. Nzinga is now a young woman, not quite at the center of power, but no longer on its edge either. She walks with the posture of someone who knows more than she says. She listens in court, but speaks in kitchens. She rides horses with the ease of a commander, but still lets others assume she's just along for the scenery. But she's watching. always watching. Her brother Mbande has seized the throne. Not officially, not in a golden crown ceremony with drumbeats and flower garlands, but in the way ambitious men always do, by pushing just hard enough, while others blink too slowly. Historians still argue whether he poisoned their father, pressured him into stepping down, or simply waited until the king was too tired to care. What's known is this: Kiluanji is dead, and Mbande now rules Ndongo, and he doesn't want competition, especially not from his half-sister, whose cleverness seems to travel faster than his messengers. Nzinga feels the change instantly. Her place at court becomes colder. Advisors who once greeted her with subtle nods now pretend not to notice. Invitations to state dinners become lost. Her quarters are moved further from the throne room, closer to the outer walls. One morning, she wakes up and finds her personal guard has been reassigned. No warning, no explanation, just gone. It's not war, but it's a message. You watch her adapt with alarming grace. She smiles more, speaks less, asks for nothing. When Mbande accuses her of plotting with coastal allies, she demurs with such calm that even he seems unsure if he made it up. When he forces her to attend his council meetings as a silent observer, she takes notes in the corner, her face unreadable. And then comes the first real fracture. Mbande, paranoid, ambitious, and not nearly as clever as he thinks, orders the execution of one of Nzinga's closest allies, a mid-ranking advisor, older than both of them, who once whispered strategy to her over pepper soup and warned her about Mbande's temper. His crime? Disloyalty. No trial, just a blade and a shallow grave outside Kabasa. Nzinga doesn't scream, she doesn't cry. That night, she performs a quiet ritual, pours palm wine onto the earth, and sleeps under a mat woven by the advisor's widow. You ask her why she isn't angrier. She says, "I am. That's why I'm waiting." Her sister Kifunji becomes her shadow during these days. They share food, dreams, and secrets. But even here, the air feels heavy. Sibling bonds in royal families are complicated. They hold hands during ceremonial dances and smile over shared meals. But beneath it all, there's an unspoken truth. Survival and affection don't always travel together. One morning, Nzinga discovers that Kifunji has been called to serve as a hostage to a rival province, part of a fragile alliance Mbande is brokering. She's stunned. She protests. Quietly, of course. She's no fool. She asks why their own blood must be sent. Mbande shrugs. Because they asked. And because you didn't offer. That night, Nzinga sharpens her spear in silence. You watch her hands move, slow, steady. Over and over again, she tests the edge. This is when she begins building a web. No one sees it. Not clearly, but it's there. She re-establishes contact with her father's old allies, begins sending coded gifts, baskets of dried fish that say more than any letter could. She trades in gossip and gathers whispers. She maps the moods of court musicians, the timing of foreign guests, the gaps in Mbande's schedules. And one day, she vanishes. Not for long, just long enough to make the palace nervous. She returns with a new look in her eyes and a new set of connections in her ledger. No one asks where she's been. No one dares. Because by now, Nzinga has become a living question. What does she know, and who does she know it from? You can't help but feel a little thrill every time she enters a room and people go quiet. She's not queen, not yet, but power hums around her like insects to fire. Then comes the summons. Mbande calls her to the council chambers. This time, not to observe, to negotiate. The Portuguese have returned. This time with priests, soldiers, and a fresh list of demands. They want more slaves, more territory, They speak in circles but gesture toward muskets. Mbande is in over his head. The Portuguese don't take him seriously. His advisors are tired. And suddenly, Nzinga's sharp tongue and sharp memory seem like useful tools again. He asks her to lead the negotiations. You hear that? That's the sound of irony knocking. She agrees, but not out of loyalty. Out of precision. This will be her moment. She prepares, reviews past treaties, revisits gift customs, practices her Portuguese. Fluent, flawless, better than most of the missionaries themselves. And then she steps into the room that will make her legend. Not with a crown, not with a sword, but with perfect posture, a diplomat's grace, and the calm of someone who already knows how this ends. You're standing just outside the hall, where history will soon trip over itself. Inside, the air is thick with incense, sweat, and suspicion. It's 1622, and the Portuguese have requested an audience with a representative of the Kingdom of Ndongo. What they expect is a frazzled prince, a stumbling translator, maybe some tribute wrapped in palm fronds. What they get is Nzinga. She enters the room not as a supplicant, not as a mere envoy, but as something else entirely. Composed, regal, quietly, terrifying. Her robes ripple like river reeds in the wind, blue and gold, embroidered with symbols of her ancestors. Around her neck, polished shells glint in the candlelight, whispering secrets no translator could interpret. The Portuguese representatives shift in their seats. Some smile, but the smiles don't reach their eyes. They expect resistance, maybe confusion. Instead, Nzinga greets them in fluent Portuguese, not even breaking eye contact as she thanks them for their hospitality, which is funny, considering. There's no chair set out for her. Ah, yes, that. There's a throne for the governor, and chairs for his men. But Nzinga has been left to stand. Whether this was intentional or just a careless insult, we'll never know. But Nzinga certainly notices. Everyone does. What happens next will ripple through history books and bedtime stories. Nzinga turns to her attendant and makes a small gesture. No words. Just that smooth flick of her hand, the way only people in total control of the moment ever manage. The attendant drops to one knee and forms a human chair. Nzinga sits on her attendant, calmly, proudly, as if this were always the plan. You can almost hear the thoughts bouncing off the stone walls. A mix of shock, admiration, and the kind of uncomfortable awe that makes colonizers recheck their maps. Historians still debate the moment. Was it improvised? Was it premeditated? Was it even real? Some European accounts omit it entirely, as if pretending it didn't happen could erase the power behind it. But in Ndongo and Matamba, the story echoes. You don't. Kneel for those who try to shrink you. You rise, or you build your own throne. From there, the meeting begins. Nzinga opens negotiations like a seasoned trader. She speaks of peace, but not submission, of alliance, but not obedience. She brings up the past, not with bitterness, but with ledger-like precision. Every broken promise, every unfair tax, every vanished envoy. She lists them like receipts and smiles between paragraphs. The governor listens. He frowns. He interrupts. She corrects him. She offers baptism. Not just hers. An entire symbolic conversion, complete with Catholic names, public ceremony, and political theatre. Not because she's suddenly religious, but because she understands value. She knows the Portuguese respect Christians. She also knows they assume African Christians will be easier to manipulate. She'll let them think that. For now, Nzinga becomes Ana de Souza, baptized before a crowd of confused onlookers, with a Portuguese godmother, and enough rosaries to weigh down a canoe. But in her eyes, behind the pageantry, there's calculation. She'll use this facade, use it until it crumbles, or until it stops being useful. You can almost feel her charting the next 3 moves as holy water drips onto her forehead. The treaty is signed. For the first time in recent memory, Ndongo gains a moment of peace. Not because of muskets, not because of prayer, because of Nzinga. You walk beside her as she leaves the negotiations. The hall behind her buzzes with murmurs, people arguing over whether she bent the kingdom or saved it, whether her baptism is a betrayal or a masterpiece. Nzinga doesn't answer those questions. She simply walks, her robes brushing the floor like tides along the shore. Later that night, she sits beneath a fig tree and drinks palm wine. You sit with her, she offers you a cup. Not bad, she says, but not sweet enough. And maybe she's talking about the wine. Maybe she's talking about the treaty. Either way, her gaze drifts toward the west, toward the Portuguese fortresses, toward the edge of control. Her fingers tap the gourd rhythmically, like the beginning of a war chant played very, very slowly. Of course, the peace doesn't last. It never does. Not in kingdoms where foreign powers keep changing the rules. Not in a land where every trade deal comes with gunpowder. Not when you've given them a taste of obedience and they start expecting a feast. The Portuguese want more. Again. They start ignoring treaty terms. Again. They take prisoners. Again. And Nzinga, she's done negotiating. The woman who once bowed, her head to be baptized, now ties on a leather breastplate and trains her archers in the forest. She doesn't just pick up a sword, she redesigns warfare. She builds alliances with other African powers. She recruits defectors. She learns every trail, every ambush route, every swamp crossing. She holds war councils by firelight, draws maps with sticks in the dirt, and speaks softly while everyone else raises their voices. One of her generals whispers, "She doesn't fear death." Another replies, "No, death fears her." You follow her into the night, not into battle, not yet, just into the tall grass where she listens for movement, tastes the wind, and leans against a termite mound like it's a throne no one's noticed. Yet, "This won't be easy," she says, "but easy isn't interesting." And the moon, high above, glows like a watchful god who knows better than to interrupt her. You wake up to the sound of drums, low, measured, and steady. Not the fast ones that call warriors to arms. These are slower, heavier. They sound like patience shaped into rhythm. Nzinga is already awake. She's kneeling by a riverbank, rinsing, her hands in the dark water. Her hair is braided tightly. Her armor glints dully in the first hint of sunlight. You wonder if she's praying. But no, she's planning. You sit with her. Neither of you speaks for a long time. And then she says, without looking at you, "We can't fight them on their terms, so we'll change the terms." The treaty she negotiated is in shambles. The Portuguese broke it before the ink dried. Again. They've resumed raiding her people for slaves. Again. They've insulted her, ignored her letters, and spread rumors that she was too weak to act. Big mistake. You see, if the Portuguese thought Nzinga would retreat into diplomacy forever, they've confused mercy with surrender. She's building a new kind of army now, one that doesn't rely on open fields and banners. It moves through the forest like smoke, fights in shadows, sleeps in trees. Her warriors are fast, loyal, and always listening. They're not just soldiers, they're a message. You follow her through the marshlands, through narrow trails that twist like memory. She rides at the front, never behind, always watching the ground, the leaves, the clouds. She knows this terrain like it's part of her, and that's exactly the point. While the Portuguese sit in stone forts polishing muskets and arguing about maps, Nzinga's army is already behind them, under them, around them. She creates chaos and then disappears. A bridge collapses, a supply wagon vanishes. A garrison wakes up to find its food stolen and its horses untied. War, Nzinga style, is more like theatre than conquest. It's slow, it's deliberate, and it's personal. Historians still argue whether she truly invented some of these guerrilla tactics, or whether she simply perfected existing ones. But either way, her approach is radical for its time. She rejects the staged battles the Portuguese favor. Instead, she plays the long game, where victory isn't about flags or forts, but exhaustion and reputation. And her reputation is growing. She becomes a ghost story the Portuguese whisper to each other, the queen who can vanish, the queen who drinks blood, the queen who rides an invisible zebra. None of that is true, obviously, especially the zebra, but Nzinga doesn't correct them. Let fear do its work. Her people too begin to see her differently. She's not just a royal, she's a warrior, a protector, a symbol. And symbols have power. Back in Cabasa, the old nobles murmur about tradition, about whether a woman should lead an army, about whether palm wine and politics should mix. Nzinga doesn't argue. She just keeps winning. But not everything goes her way. Her brother Mbande, yes, the same one who tried to sideline her, humiliate her, and exile her from power, dies suddenly, and not under mysterious circumstances, which would be too neat. No, he dies from stress or illness, or maybe from realizing he was never really in charge. The point is, he's gone. And the throne, well, now it's empty. You sit beside Nzinga as the advisors come one by one, pretending to ask for her help while subtly begging her to take over. She sips her wine, listens, occasionally nods. She doesn't rush. Power, remember, is patient. Eventually she accepts the title, Queen of Ndongo, not just a figurehead, a sovereign. And she doesn't inherit peace. She inherits chaos, a kingdom under siege, a court full of spies, and a neighbor to the west that's eyeing her territory like it's roast meat. But she also inherits something else, freedom, because now, finally, she doesn't have to play nice. She sets about strengthening the kingdom from within, tightens trade routes, expands alliances with nearby rulers, sends scouts farther than anyone has dared in years, and always watches the Portuguese. She knows they haven't forgotten her. They're just waiting. And so is she. One night, during a rare moment of quiet, she sits on a worn mat outside her quarters. The stars are unusually bright. The fire crackles. You ask her if she's tired. She shrugs. Tired is for people who stop. She pours more wine into your cup, not quite, smiling. You're not planning to stop, are you? You shake your head. Good. Because this is just the beginning. The wind shifts. You can feel it. A little colder now. The drums quieter. The chatter of courtiers more clipped. Something's coming. Nzinga senses it too. She's queen now. Officially, publicly. Undeniably. The court has bowed. The nobles have sworn fealty. And the people whisper her name like it's both shield and prayer. But in the distance, trouble brews like spoiled palm wine. The Portuguese want revenge. You see, they were never just insulted by Nzinga's refusal to grovel. They were embarrassed, outsmarted, upstaged. And there's nothing more dangerous than a foreign empire with bruised pride and too many guns. Their demands grow sharper. They want land. They want taxes. They want tribute in people, and that's the part Nzinga cannot allow. She remembers the villages emptied overnight, the young taken, the old abandoned. She remembers the way her people looked at her afterward, not with anger, but with hollow hope, the kind that makes promises taste bitter. So she says no, not diplomatically, not politely, just no. And that's when the Portuguese do what they do best. They escalate, they march, they raid, they burn. They tell the world Nzinga is no longer queen, that she's been replaced by someone more reasonable, a puppet in a gold robe who can't even find Cabasa on a map. The puppet has a name, of course. Doesn't matter. What matters is he has Portuguese backing, which means cannons, scribes, and just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate to European allies. Nzinga refuses to be erased. But here's the thing. Cabasa is no longer safe. The capital has become a chessboard soaked in oil. Every messenger is suspect. Every well could be poisoned. Every smile might be a setup. So she makes a decision most rulers would never dare. She leaves. Not in the night. Not in secret. She leaves, openly, visibly, with banners and gongs and a pace that says, "You don't chase me. I'm already ahead of you." She retreats into the interior, into the wilds of Matamba, a neighboring kingdom her ancestors once eyed, and now she claims as her own. Historians still argue whether Matamba welcomed her or was simply overwhelmed. What's clear is Nzinga arrives with soldiers, plans, and charisma. She doesn't just move in. She absorbs. She sets up court under trees, holds councils in clearings, turns abandoned outposts into training grounds. She takes Matamba and makes it not a hideout, but a new base of power, and you follow her into it step by step. At first it feels like exile. The people are wary, resources thin, the terrain unfamiliar. But Nzinga is relentless. She studies the land like a lover, learns the rivers, finds the choke points, adapts her battle tactics for jungle paths and narrow streams. She rewards loyalty with generosity and disloyalty with such elegant cruelty that no one needs it explained twice. Soon, warriors from surrounding provinces start defecting to her. Women and men, hunters, merchants, even old soldiers who thought their fighting days were over. They come not because they want gold, but because they want something rarer. Purpose. Nzinga gives them that, and something else, too. A role in building the kingdom from scratch. You're there when the first clay walls go up, when the first storage huts are packed with dried cassava and palm nuts, when her new court is marked not by marble or mosaics, but by patterns of stones and symbols carved into tree trunks. It's not grand, not yet. But it breathes. At night, she walks the camp with bare feet, greeting sentries, asking after their families, pausing at each fire like a ghost of leadership made flesh. She listens more than she speaks. When she does speak, people lean in. And then comes the moment everyone dreads but knows is coming. The Portuguese attack. Not just a raid this time, a campaign. Troops with banners and gunpowder, foreign mercenaries, and even some African allies, bribed or bullied into service. They come expecting a chase. What they get is a trap. Nzinga lures them deep into the Matamba forests, uses the terrain like an ally. Her soldiers don't meet them head-on. They harass, retreat, vanish. They poison wells, cut supply lines, release captured livestock in the middle of the night just to spook the invaders. When the enemy sets up camp, they find ants in their grain, snakes in their boots, and silence where there should be footsteps. You sit beside Nzinga as she studies their positions drawn in charcoal on tree bark. "They think they're hunting us," she says, sipping wine, "but they're just feeding the forest." By the time the Portuguese finally withdraw, they've lost more to fatigue, confusion, and disease than to arrows. They return to Luanda humiliated, blaming maps, bad weather, and uncooperative locals. Nzinga doesn't even send a taunt. She doesn't have to. Her silence says, "I'm not done." You wake to birdsong and the slow creak of tree limbs swaying overhead. Nzinga's camp is unusually quiet. Not tense, just focused. People move with a kind of practiced calm, like dancers before a performance. No wasted steps, no nervous glances, just preparation. Because today, Nzinga changes the game again. This time, she doesn't wear armor. No feathers in her hair, no spear strapped to her back. She dresses in clean, simple robes and instructs her inner circle to do the same. It's not a battle day, it's baptism day. Again. If you're blinking in confusion, so are her advisors. She already converted once, remember? Ana de Souza, rosaries, godparents, ceremonial water and all. That was years ago in Luanda. But this is different. This one is for the Portuguese. She's sending a message, not just with words, but with optics. A theatrical return to Christianity, performed for maximum diplomatic impact. She's inviting missionaries, inviting attention, and inviting the Portuguese to think, for just a moment, that maybe she's ready to behave. But of course, Nzinga is never just behaving. She's maneuvering, because she knows the Portuguese still love paperwork. And in their bureaucratic, little world, a converted baptized ruler is civilized, a partner, someone who can be negotiated with. Nzinga will let them believe that. For a while, historians still debate how devout she truly was. Was she a true believer in Catholicism, a spiritual pluralist, a political opportunist? Maybe all three. Maybe neither. Maybe faith for her was less about gods and more about leverage. What's certain is this: she uses religion like a dagger hidden in a bouquet. The baptism is elaborate. The Portuguese clergy are allowed to participate, but only under her conditions. No condescension, no power plays, and absolutely no chairs, unless she gets one first. You stand behind her as she bows her head and lets the water fall again. 2. The Portuguese, it looks like submission. To Nzinga, it's camouflage. And immediately after the ceremony, she takes the next step in her multi-layered game of diplomacy. She writes letters, many of them. Some go to the Portuguese in Luanda, some to the papal authorities in Europe, some to other African leaders. In every letter, she signs with her Portuguese name, Ana de Souza, but never fails to include her royal title as Queen of Matamba and Ndongo. It's not just branding, it's a reminder. I'm still here, the signature says, and I'm still the one you have to deal with. Her use of written diplomacy is strategic. She understands that ink lasts longer than rumors, and that a well-phrased letter can delay a war just long enough to plant more yams, train more scouts, or secure another trade route. And speaking of trade, this is when Nzinga begins to lean into the business side of queenship. She's no longer just holding territory. She's selling, not people. She's reducing her reliance on the slave trade, unlike many neighboring rulers, but goods, iron, cloth, palm oil, crafts, even animal skins. Her court becomes a marketplace as well as a war room. Trade caravans move between regions, and Nzinga watches every transaction with the cold eyes of someone counting not just profits, but loyalties. She uses the wealth to buy weapons. Not from the Portuguese. She doesn't trust their generosity. She turns instead to the Dutch. Ah yes, the Dutch. Red-cheeked, wide-hatted, suspiciously eager Protestants who show up on ships full of sugar, gin, and very sharp knives. They hate the Portuguese, mostly for colonial reasons, and Nzinga sees a perfect opening. She begins communicating with them, slowly at first, then more openly. You watch her balance the two European rivals like a juggler with flaming gourds. One Catholic, one Protestant. She flatters the Portuguese while flirting with Dutch alliance. She promises trade deals, then delays. She shares just enough information to keep both sides unsure of where she truly stands. It's a dangerous game. But Nzinga was born twisting around danger. Her court evolves into a diplomatic hub. Foreign merchants arrive in droves. Some want ivory, others seek gold. A few hope to convert her, again. She listens to them all with the same expression, mildly amused and completely in control. Meanwhile, her people flourish. Crops stabilize, roads expand, new settlements emerge around market centers. She's not just surviving anymore, she's ruling, but not without tension. Every ally must be watched, every shipment accounted for, every treaty reread twice, once by daylight, once by firelight. Nzinga sleeps lightly and wakes early. When she walks, her soldiers walk with her. When she speaks, the court falls silent. Even laughter is measured in her presence. At night, she sips wine on the veranda and listens to the frogs call from the riverbank. She asks you if you've ever seen a snake eat something larger than itself. You nod. She says, "That's the Portuguese, but they haven't finished chewing." And you know, she's waiting for the moment they choke. You're walking through tall grass, just past the camp's outer edge. The earth here is soft, freshly turned, and smells faintly of smoke and citrus. Nzinga is ahead of you, her pace steady, her robes tied up at the waist, revealing scuffed sandals and legs that know the road too well. She's not heading to a council, not to a ceremony. Today is different. Today is war. She doesn't make declarations, not with trumpets or heralds. She just moves, and everyone around her knows what that means. The Portuguese, having spent years nursing their bruised egos, have launched another push inland. This one's bigger, more organized, funded even by Lisbon directly. They call it a civilizing mission. You and Nzinga know better. It's a land grab with incense. They expect to break her. Again. To burn her crops, scatter her people, and return triumphant to Luanda with tales of how Queen Nzinga finally knelt. Instead, they find traps. Her soldiers have rigged forest trails with spiked pits. Bridges collapse under weight that was, just yesterday, perfectly safe. Scouts vanish into the tree line and don't come back. Nzinga doesn't fight like they do. She doesn't march with banners or issue formal challenges. Her warfare is smarter, crafted, in backrooms over clay maps and whispered strategies. She sends in small teams. They raid supply lines, sabotage water sources, slip into camps at night to whisper false directions to enemy guides. It's chaos, beautiful, deliberate chaos. And in the center of it all is Nzinga. Unflinching, methodical, drinking wine from a gourd between updates like she's playing a game of checkers rather than dodging musket balls. You ride with her one afternoon, flanked by guards whose spears are etched with family names. You pass wounded trees and scorched grass, evidence of skirmishes barely a day old. A soldier jogs up to report a Portuguese camp has been abandoned, half-eaten by insects and panic. Nzinga simply nods. They'll try again. They always do. But you see the flicker in her eyes. Satisfaction? Relief? Maybe something darker. Because each battle won is also a memory added to the weight she carries. Historians still argue whether Nzinga ever truly enjoyed war. Some say she craved it, that it proved her strength. Others suggest it drained her, that she only fought because peace was never an option. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Nzinga didn't love war, but she loved not being conquered. That distinction matters. You arrive at the next encampment at dusk. Fires are already lit, casting long shadows against makeshift walls. Her soldiers move efficiently, unpacking goods, tending wounds, preparing for whatever tomorrow demands. Nzinga dismounts and walks through the camp in silence. No fanfare. No entourage. Just a queen inspecting her people like a gardener, checks each leaf for rot. She pauses at the infirmary tent, kneels beside a boy no older than 16 with a bandaged leg and fever-glossed eyes. She asks his name. He tries to bow. She stops him. "You fought well," she says, gently touching his hand. "Rest now. You're part of something." He nods, tears in his lashes, and she moves on. Later that night, she gathers her generals. The council sits in a rough circle, lit by firelight and tense silence. They lay out maps drawn from memory and dirt, because paper doesn't survive this climate, and spies survive even less. Nzinga listens, always listens, and when she speaks, it's in calm, clipped tones that cut deeper than most war cries. "They'll send another unit by the river," she says. "They'll expect us to flank north, so we go south." Someone objects. She raises an eyebrow. "That's enough." "We do not win by being predictable," she adds, sipping wine. "We win by being everywhere they're not." The next morning, her plan goes into motion. You watch as her forces vanish into the forest like mist. Archers climb trees, foot soldiers move in silence. Even the horses seem quieter, as if they understand who rides them. The Portuguese, meanwhile, blunder forward. Their maps are outdated. Their guides are unreliable. Their confidence is a little too heavy, like armor not quite built for heat and mud. They don't realize they're walking into a queen's trap until it's already closed. The battle is brief, brutal, perfect. A raid hits from the rear while a blockade pins their wagons. Their muskets misfire in the humidity. Their leaders shout conflicting orders. By noon, half the company has fled. By dusk, only smoke remains. Nzinga doesn't cheer. She simply orders her troops to disappear again. Disappear and wait. It's not about glory. It's about surviving, long enough to build something bigger than fear. And now, in these quiet moments, when the camp settles and her generals murmur stories over boiled yams, you begin to see the shape of something new forming. Not just resistance, a kingdom. The rains come early this year. Not a drizzle, real rain. Heavy, drumming, relentless. It soaks the leaves, swells the rivers, and turns roads into thick, squelching trails that even the best soldiers sink into up to their knees. You'd think it would slow Nzinga down. It doesn't. Instead, she uses the rain like a curtain. Her scouts move freely, while others hunker in their tents. Her envoys cross territories unseen. Even her enemies seem quieter, dampened, literally and figuratively. But beneath the sound of falling water, a shift is underway. Nzinga has accepted the fall of Ndongo, not as defeat, no, never that, but as transformation. She's done mourning what was. Now she's building what will be. Her new kingdom, Matamba, is taking shape, and it's nothing like the Portuguese expect. They imagine dusty forts and corrupted chiefs. What they get is a fast-evolving political machine, engineered by someone who knows every trick they've used, and a few they haven't. You follow her through the markets of the new capital, still more a living organism than a polished city. Traders sell cloth dyed in bright reds and deep blues. Hunters bring in wild pig, dried fish, and the occasional live monkey in a vine basket. Children run barefoot past elders debating law and rice prices in the same breath. Nzinga walks the lanes like a quiet storm. She pauses to greet weavers by name. She examines a newly carved chair and casually mentions the armrests are 2 inches, too low. She stops by the stonemasons and suggests that the entrance to the council chamber be widened, just enough to make foreign ambassadors feel small. Everything she touches becomes more efficient, more deliberate, and more hers. But the pressure hasn't let up. The Portuguese are still a threat, always circling, always recruiting, and now they've started spreading stories that Nzinga is losing her grip, that her soldiers are deserting, that her people whisper rebellion. She laughs when she hears that, because she's been watching her people closely, and what she sees is something the Portuguese have never understood. Loyalty that isn't bought, but earned. Still, the rumors sting. She decides it's time to remind everyone exactly who she is. She hosts a feast, a massive one. Not a royal vanity project, but a political event disguised as a party. The guest list is strategic. Regional leaders, tribal chiefs, envoys from border, provinces, and yes, a couple of very confused European merchants who think they're about to broker trade deals over roast goat. You help prepare the setting. Banners are hung, not with gaudy symbols, but with ancestral patterns that speak to deeper truths. Dancers rehearse in the dust. Cooks grind spices until the air tastes like fire. And when the guests arrive, it all unfolds with eerie precision. Nzinga appears late, of course, just late enough to make everyone notice. She's dressed not in royal jewels, but in traditional war leathers, softened at the edges. Around her neck, a simple cord strung with beads from both Ndongo and Matamba. Her message is clear. She is not just the queen of one place. She is the bridge between them. The feast is a sensory avalanche. Drums, laughter, meat cooked so slowly, it falls apart at a glance. But the real main course is Nzinga herself. She gives a speech, not loud, not long, just enough to make every listener feel seen. She speaks of unity, of sovereignty, of the land that remembers its people. She names her allies, praises their histories, and hints, very gently, that those who aren't with her might soon be irrelevant. Historians still debate whether this moment marked the true consolidation of her power. What's not debated? No, one left that feast unsure of who was in charge. But amid all the ceremony and careful pageantry, there's a quieter undercurrent. Nzinga is tired. Not broken, not old, but human. You see it in the moments between performances. The way she leans back, just slightly, when no one is watching. The way her fingers tremble for a heartbeat after lifting a heavy ceremonial spear. She's carried this kingdom on her back, and though her spine is straight, the weight has not been light. That night, long after the feast ends and the fires burn, lo, you find her sitting alone on a carved stool, sipping palm wine from a polished gourd. She doesn't look at you. She just says, "It never stops, you know, even in the quiet." You ask her what does. She replies, "The need to prove it." And she sips again. The fire is low tonight, just embers really. Soft orange glows blinking like tired eyes in the dark. And Nzinga sits with her legs tucked beneath her, robe draped like a second skin, hair loose for once. Around you, the camp is quiet, not empty, just resting, like lungs between breaths. She's deep in thought, and you sense why. Matamba is strong now. The borders are defended. The markets are thriving. The Portuguese are grumbling in Luanda, writing reports full of excuses and passive-aggressive Latin. But Nzinga knows that security, true, lasting security, isn't built with victories. It's built with loyalty. And loyalty, when you're a queen who's displaced 2 courts and danced between 3 empires, has to be curated carefully. So Nzinga begins her most unexpected project yet, building an army from scratch. Not just any army, one loyal to her and her alone. She starts by freeing slaves. Not a few, hundreds, some from her own service, some purchased outright from Portuguese outposts, an irony that tastes almost sweet. But she doesn't just free them, she invites them into a new life, one with structure, dignity, and power. She trains them, personally. You're there when the first drills begin, on a wide patch of cleared ground, dusty and buzzing with heat. She doesn't shout, she instructs, shows them how to move together, how to use terrain, how to think like water, not stone, and she teaches them the one lesson most armies forget. Fear doesn't win battles. Clarity does. They begin to call her Ngola, not just a queen, but the leader of war. The title once reserved for male rulers. She doesn't correct them. Why would she? She also revisits old alliances, reaches out to long-standing enemies of the Portuguese, courts exiles, runaway soldiers, even former mercenaries who once fought against her and now ask to serve beneath her banner. One such man, an aging Dutch gunner with inked hands and a wheeze like a haunted bellows, tells her, "You don't command like a monarch. You command like someone who's already survived the thing we're all scared of." She smiles. "That's because I have." Historians still debate the nature of this new force. Was it a standing army? A political instrument? A living symbol of Nzinga's philosophy? What's agreed on is this: no ruler in the region had ever assembled something quite like it, and it works. Portuguese incursions dwindle, not because they lack firepower, but because Nzinga's territory becomes a place where firepower is meaningless. Her scouts know every path. Her soldiers are locals, fiercely familiar with the ground they defend. Even the wildlife seems to take her side. One Portuguese letter complains bitterly about hostile insects, which feels like poetic justice more than entomology. But Nzinga doesn't just win with blades. She builds with stories. She encourages the oral historians, griots, to recite the legacy of resistance. Songs are written about her ambushes, her escapes, her cleverness. Children begin to imitate her in play. Elders cite her words in arguments. She becomes more than a queen. She becomes folklore in real time. And yet, through all of this, she never stops watching. You see it constantly. She watches her advisors for changes in tone. She watches the trade reports for unusual dips. She watches the sky, even, for signs of drought or rain. Her gaze is sharp, patient, and nearly impossible to surprise. Which is why, one day, when a messenger arrives panting from the western edge of Matamba with news of a small revolt, barely a skirmish, you're surprised when she stands immediately. "Pack, lightly," she says. She's not waiting for updates. She's going to see it herself. You ride with her across the plains, hooves pounding the earth, wind snapping through the tall grasses like gossip on the move. And when you arrive at a small village recently courted by rival chiefs, you expect a show of strength. Instead, Nzinga walks in alone. No army, no crown, just a walking stick and a voice like a blade wrapped in silk. She doesn't scold. She listens. She asks the villagers what they want, what they fear, what they were promised. Then she promises them something better. And because she never lies about the hard parts, they believe her. By nightfall, the revolt evaporates. The next morning, she leaves them with grain, a carved drum, and 2 fresh teachers trained in medicine and irrigation. It's not bribery, it's vision. You travel back to the capital in near silence, the air buzzing with insects and something else, something harder to name: respect, admiration, maybe the growing suspicion that you are witnessing something truly rare. A ruler who not only wins, but understands why. Nzinga sits that evening with her cup of palm wine, gazing into the fire. You sit beside her, as always. "You can't hold a kingdom," she says, "like it's a rope. You hold it like a child, careful, but not afraid. You sip. It's stronger tonight. Or maybe that's just the weight of what she's building. You wake to singing, not battle chants, not religious hymns. Something else, lighter, drifting through the dawn air like smoke from a well-fed fire. It's court singers rehearsing a new piece, you realize, written in honor of Nzinga's recent victories. The melody is slow, swaying. You find yourself humming along without realizing it. This is what Nzinga has created, a court not just of warriors, but of artists, of builders, of minds. Her capital in Matamba, once little more than a forest clearing with tents and ambition, has become a cultural hive. Caravans arrive daily now, trailing goods and stories from across the region. Matamba has taken on a new shape, not a fortress, but a rhythm, and it moves to Nzinga's beat. You follow her through the evolving heart of it. There's a new library, small, but carefully tended, its manuscripts wrapped in bark cloth and coconut fiber string. Local historians debate side by side with foreign scribes. A medical garden has sprouted near the palace, where herbalists test recipes passed down from grandmothers on bruised bananas and willing apprentices. Nzinga encourages it all. She doesn't just want a kingdom that survives. She wants one that thinks. But of course, survival is still part of the job. Because as Matamba rises, the Portuguese try again. This time not with muskets, but with money. They send envoys, traders, silver coins, stamped with European kings' faces. They try to sweet-talk Nzinga into trade deals tilted in their favor, offering shiny things for access, control, a little piece of her authority here and there. She sees through it instantly. And yet, she plays along. For a while, she allows a few shipments, watches how they operate, makes careful notes about the names they drop, the maps they carry, the people they try to bribe. Then, in a meeting so quiet it barely makes sound, she bans 3 of them for life and redirects their cargo to nearby orphan houses. Historians still debate whether this was tactical overreach or theatrical flourish. You decide it was both, because Nzinga understands that empire building isn't just about beating enemies. It's about showing your own people how unshakable your vision really is. That afternoon, she sits beneath a woven canopy outside the council chamber. You join her. She's reading something, an old letter, judging by the creases. Probably one she wrote years ago. She folds it neatly and sets it aside. Then, without turning her head, she says, "Do you know what I regret?" You wait. She doesn't speak again for several breaths. Finally, "I regret needing to become what I hated, just to keep what I loved." You don't ask what she means, because you know. Nzinga's reign hasn't been spotless. She's made hard calls, harsh alliances, tactical slave trades, executions of traitors. She's had to speak like a European, negotiate like a colonizer, and sometimes trade humanity for leverage. Not because she wanted to, because the game was rigged from the start. And still, she plays. But she's also shifting the board now. One quiet piece at a time. She launches new housing programs for war widows, creates stipends for children of fallen soldiers, establishes protocols for crop sharing during drought. She even introduces new court customs that blur the rigid social lines the Portuguese have tried to draw between civilized and savage. She's writing a new script, line by line, and watching the kingdom learn to recite it. You follow her later to a meeting with a visiting Dutch trader, one of the few she respects. He speaks bluntly. She appreciates that. They talk trade, religion, gunpowder. At one point he says, "You're not like other monarchs." She replies, "They said that before, and then they tried to kill me." The Dutchman laughs awkwardly. She doesn't. But after he leaves, she leans back and allows herself a small smile. You realize that, in a strange way, she's enjoying this era more than the war years. Not because it's easier, but because it requires a different kind of brilliance. The kind that reshapes the soil beneath her people's feet. One evening, she calls the musicians to her private hall. Not for a ceremony, just to hear something new. They perform a fresh composition. Slow, haunting, about a river that turns to smoke but still flows strong. You suspect it's about her. So does she, but she lets it wash over her without comment. And when the performance ends, she pours you both a drink. Palm wine, aged and mellow. "This," she says, swirling the liquid in the gourd, "is how we win. One slow sip at a time." You drink, and the night deepens like a secret. The heat today is the kind that makes everything feel slower, like the air has weight, like thoughts need extra time to form. But Nzinga, as always, moves with purpose. She's not slowed. If anything, she seems sharper under pressure, as if the sun's intensity just burns distractions away. This morning, she's overseeing preparations for a funeral. Not just any funeral, a royal one. A general has died. Old age, not battle. One of her earliest supporters, a man who defected to her side during the exodus from Ndongo. He wasn't loud or flashy, but he was steady. One of those quiet pillars you don't notice until the roof leans without them. Nzinga insists on leading the rites herself. You walk behind her, through rows of people in red and brown woven cloth. Drums beat slowly, like distant thunder trying not to wake the world. Incense curls around your ankles. The sun is a white coin in the sky. The ceremony is part tradition, part theatre, part political signal. There are dancers in bone masks. There, movements jerky and surreal. Musicians pluck slow melodies from stringed instruments you've never seen before. Women scatter herbs in ritual patterns, while elders chant in unison. Stories of birth, battle, and quiet meals shared on the eve of storm. Nzinga stands still. Through it all, her face unreadable, and then, just before the burial, she steps forward and speaks. She doesn't shout, doesn't recite some grand royal speech. She just tells a story. About the man who once gave up everything to follow a woman with no army, no crown, no guarantees. About how he taught younger soldiers to sleep with one eye open, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. You look around. People are weeping. Because in Nzinga's voice, you hear the thing she rarely lets show. Grief. Real, bone-deep grief. She finishes the story and pours wine onto the earth. The gourd empties slowly. The silence afterward feels heavier than any drumbeat. You walk with her after the funeral. She doesn't speak at first, just breathes. Eventually she says, "I wish I'd told him more. Not about war, about little things, like how the birds here don't fly straight in the rain, or how cassava tastes sweeter when you eat it without talking." You nod, because what do you say to someone who has buried more than one life's worth of loyalty? She recovers quickly. She always does, but something lingers. That night, she calls for a new tradition. Every fallen warrior will have their story, sung, not just their victories, but their quirks, their voices, remembered, not erased. You sit with the court musicians as they compose the first verses of what will become a growing archive, oral footnotes to Nzinga's reign. They use repetition, layered harmonies, quiet refrains that slip into dreams like lullabies. The song grows slowly, one name at a time. Nzinga listens to every draft, offers notes. "Too sad," she says. "Make it hopeful. Death isn't a defeat here." As this memorial tradition takes root, another aspect of court life grows stranger and more fascinating. Nzinga's masks. Not metaphorical masks, real ones. She commissions them regularly now, carved from wood, bone, sometimes shell. Each one is designed with care and worn during special court rituals. Sometimes she wears them. Sometimes her warriors do. Sometimes no one wears them. And they just sit there on pedestals, staring like silent advisors from the world between. They're not decorative. They mean things. Each mask represents a lesson, a warning, a memory. There's one with a mouth stitched shut, a reminder about spies. One with hollow eyes and no ears, a tribute to a deaf warrior who could still see truth. They unsettle visitors. Good. Because Nzinga's power now is not just military, it's spiritual. She's become more than a queen. In some eyes, she's a conduit between ancestors and living, earth and sky, memory and becoming. Historians still debate the nature of her beliefs during this time. Did she see herself as divine? As chosen? Or just as necessary? One travelling priest wrote in his diary, "The Queen speaks with ghosts and they answer." You're not sure he meant it metaphorically, and neither, perhaps, is Nzinga. In council meetings now, she speaks of timing not just as strategy, but as fate. She delays trade deals based on dreams, declines treaties on days she calls clouded. Some advisors push back. She doesn't punish them, she educates them. Brings in elders from across the land to explain why power without ritual is like flame without firewood. You sit in one such session. An old woman with silver rings on every finger explains how every victory must be sealed with a story. Otherwise, it fades. Nzinga nods, and you understand. She's not just building a kingdom, she's making it unforgettable. That night, over wine, she looks at you and says, "They think power is a crown. But power is what happens after they forget the crown." And you realize she's planning not just for the next raid or the next harvest. She's planning for when she's no longer here. But her story still is. The stars are different tonight, clearer, bolder, as if they've crept closer just to listen. Nzinga stands at the edge of the camp, her silhouette lit by the dying fire. She's silent, arms folded, eyes fixed on the horizon. You stand beside her, saying nothing because she isn't just thinking, she's remembering. You already know what she's thinking about. Her sister, Kifunji. Years have passed since Nzinga first sent her away, not out of cruelty, not entirely. It was politics, survival. The only coin powerful enough to buy temporary peace with an increasingly aggressive Portuguese front. Kifunji had become a pawn. One Nzinga moved with hesitation, but moved all the same. Now, Kifunji is back. Not free, but transferred. Brought from Luanda in a formal procession as a gesture of goodwill. The Portuguese claimed it was to renew peace talks. You know better. It was bait. Nzinga accepted the gesture without ceremony. She welcomed her sister back, dressed in silence, and offered no speeches. But her eyes, those eyes, said everything the court was too afraid to ask. Kifunji is no longer the woman who left. Her voice is softer now, her posture straighter, as if braced for a blow. She eats with careful movements, sleeps lightly, trusts no one. You try to greet her one morning. She nods, polite but distant. Nzinga watches her like someone studying a reflection in water, familiar but distorted. They speak only behind closed doors. The court speculates. Of course it does. Some whisper reconciliation. Others suspect a reckoning. But no one knows. Not even you. What's clear is this. Something between them is broken. Not irreparably, but deeply. You're there the night Nzinga receives word of a small rebellion brewing along the southern border. Nothing serious. Just a few opportunists testing the line. She calls a war council. Kifunji appears at the edge of the gathering. Nzinga sees her and pauses. Then she nods once. A chair is placed beside hers. Gasps ripple like wind through tall grass, but no one objects. Kifunji says nothing throughout the meeting. She listens, watches. When the plans are finalized and the officers dismissed, she remains. So does Nzinga. The tent flap falls closed behind you. What follows isn't a royal decree or a sibling embrace. It's a long, long silence. Nzinga breaks it first. You're still angry, she says. Kifunji doesn't deny it. She just asks, was it worth it? Nzinga looks down at her hands. They didn't kill you, she says. That's what was worth it. You leave them there, in their shared silence, not resolved, but seen. Historians still argue about Kifunji's return. Some say she was never truly imprisoned. Others say she lived under near-house arrest in Luanda, a political trophy. The truth, as always, is tangled. What's certain is that from this point forward, Kifunji becomes a quiet figure at Nzinga's side, not an advisor, not quite an ally, but present. And in Matamba, presence is a kind of power. Nzinga doesn't soften, but she changes, slightly. She delegates more, trains younger commanders, spends time in villages, listening to disputes about goats and grain, not just borders and war. One afternoon, you walk with her through a smaller village, a half-day's ride from the capital. Children run barefoot through cassava fields. A woman offers Nzinga a bowl of fermented millet and an awkward curtsy. Nzinga smiles, takes the bowl, drinks. She's not there as queen. Not exactly. Just as someone who remembers what it's like to be uncertain. You sit together that night under a thatched canopy. Fireflies blink lazily. A dog somewhere snores like a small drum. Nzinga says, "My sister thinks I lost something." You wait. "She's right," she says. Then more quietly, "But I saved everything else." You ask her what hurts more, losing your sister or knowing you do it again. She doesn't answer. You don't need her to. Later that month, Nzinga calls for a special ceremony. No masks, no drums, just a fire. She asks the griots to recite the stories of lost siblings. Not queens, not warriors, just people. Brothers who drowned, sisters who vanished, twins divided by war. As the night stretches on, voices rise and fall in gentle waves. Some cry, others hum. The fire spits occasionally, like it's listening too. Kifunji is there, sitting, still, and when her story is told by someone else, not her, Nzinga closes her eyes. No one claps. That's not the point. This is not about forgiveness. It's about acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's the first kind of healing that matters. The dry season comes like a whispered dare. No warning, no apology. Just crackling grass, parched streams, and air that carries the scent of dust and tension. Nzinga adjusts. She always does. The palace moves into its dry season rhythm. Water is rationed. Meals are lighter. Councils meet under shade instead of roofs. But even as the land tightens, Nzinga's presence expands. She's everywhere, inspecting food stores, riding to outposts, checking in with merchants and militia alike. You trail behind her across hardened paths, the earth crumbling beneath your boots. Everyone in Matamba feels the shift. The air holds its breath, because it's during these long, dry weeks that the rumors begin. Nzinga isn't real, they say. She's a spirit. She walks through fire, turns bullets to dust, disappears in battle, and reappears days later, untouched, sipping wine as if death got distracted. You hear these whispers in taverns, at river crossings, from caravan guards half laughing as they say it. You want to correct them, but the truth is, you're not entirely sure they're wrong. Something is happening. Nzinga begins to act differently, not erratic, just elevated. She consults spirit workers more often. She holds rituals that last until dawn. She dreams loudly, muttering, in sleep. Sometimes waking with ideas that feel more like prophecies than plans. She starts spending nights alone in the hills, wrapped in cloth and silence. You ask her, once, if she's all right. She smiles, that calm, terrifying smile of someone who's 2 steps ahead of your concern. "I'm listening," she says. They're louder now. You don't ask who they are, because you already know. Nzinga, in this phase of her life, becomes something closer to myth. She still leads battles, still signs treaties, still trains troops, But her legend grows faster than any army. Historians still argue what caused this transformation. Was it grief, age, exhaustion, or had she always been more than flesh? There's a story that goes around. A Portuguese officer claims he shot at her and missed 3 times. He swears she looked right at him and smiled. When he blinked, she was gone. It probably isn't true, but it's what people want to believe, and Nzinga doesn't stop them. She begins appearing in places no one expected, in dreams, in sudden visits to border towns, in whispered warnings passed between rival chiefs who swear she showed up just long enough to issue a threat and vanish. Even in the capital, she becomes harder to track. She's there, then not. In the council chamber, then riding through the forest without explanation. You find her once, sitting by a waterfall in the far east of the territory. Alone, hair loose, face bare, no guards in sight. She's watching the water, not the cascade itself, but the small eddies at the edge, where the current loops back on itself. Everything returns, she murmurs. Even what we bury. You ask if she's speaking of the war. She shakes her head. No, I'm speaking of me, and then she's silent again. Back at court, her behavior becomes increasingly difficult to explain to outsiders. She refuses certain meetings, claims she's waiting for the right wind. She delays diplomatic envoys, and then suddenly appears, at their tents at midnight, bearing questions they can't answer, an insight they never asked for. You begin to understand that Nzinga isn't withdrawing from power. She's shifting it, turning it inward, deepening it, twisting it like a vine so that it roots more firmly in things the Portuguese will never understand. Story, symbol, presence. This is her ghost warrior phase. She rarely sleeps in the same place twice. She keeps the court guessing. She lets Matamba run, not on command, but on rhythm. And somehow it works. Her generals adapt. Her people follow. Even her enemies seem unsure whether to fear her or build a shrine to her. And through it all, Kifunji remains. She doesn't challenge her sister, doesn't try to explain her to others. She just stays, watches, like someone who has decided to keep guard over something they don't understand but deeply respect. One night, Nzinga calls the court together with no agenda, no war update, no treaty, just a gathering. She walks among them, not as queen, but as Angola, the warrior, the memory, the flame, and she says, "When I die, don't bury me in the ground." Murmurs ripple through the crowd. She continues, "Bury me in your mouths, your songs, your children's questions." She smiles. "That's the only place I'll be safe." No one applauds. They just listen. And from that night forward, a new phrase spreads across the kingdom, spoken softly, like a warning or a blessing. She's still watching. The rain returns with a vengeance. Not a cleansing rain. This one is heavy, moody, constant. It soaks the roofs, floods the trails, curls under doorways and turns roads into rivers. The whole kingdom seems to slow under its weight. And even the frogs are quieter, as if unsure whether to sing or sleep. Nzinga doesn't mind the weather. She walks through it, cloak soaked, sandals squelching in the mud. She says it makes people honest. Rain peels the lies off your skin. You don't argue, not with her, not anymore. But this season, something feels different. She's older now, not weak, not failing, just quieter in ways that feel deeper than silence. Her movements have become more economical, her instructions more precise. There's a stillness to her now that borders on sacred. And in that stillness, she begins reaching out to the Dutch again. Not because she trusts them. She doesn't trust anyone who sails in with spices and sails out with people, but she understands use and timing and leverage. The Dutch are more established now, trading in guns, sugar, slaves. They're Protestant, which makes them the enemy of the Portuguese by default. They need footholds inland. Nzinga offers one. On paper, at least. A few Dutch envoys arrive under grey skies, their faces stiff from the long ride, their boots muddy to the knees. They're nervous, and with good reason. Nzinga receives them barefoot. Not because she's making a statement. Well, maybe because she's making a statement. Her presence is impossible to read. She wears no crown, no war gear, just plain cloth and a small knife at her hip. They begin to speak about trade, logistics, mutually beneficial agreements. She lets them. Then she says, "You know why you're here?" They stammer something diplomatic. She smiles. "Because your enemies have forgotten I'm alive. That's your mistake. I never forget who is." And just like that, they're hers. Not allies, not exactly. Tools. Nzinga is assembling another weapon. Only this time, it's not made of metal. It's made of promises, ambiguities, and imported gunpowder. She lets the Dutch think they're in control. Lets them establish a tiny outpost under Matamba protection. Lets them write up trade contracts full of clever clauses. But every line they draft, she revises. And she does something else too. She sends envoys of her own, not just to the Dutch, to other African kingdoms, smaller ones, rivals, neighbours. She starts offering something the Portuguese never did: partnership, not conquest, not coercion, cooperation. You watch her do it, one letter at a time, one messenger at a time, one palm wine toast at a time. She's spinning a web across the region, and no one sees the full design but her. Historians still debate what she was building during these years. Was it a federation, a proto-state, a resistance alliance, or was it simply survival, disguised as elegance? What's clear is this: Nzinga is no longer defending her legacy. She's extending it, and she does it with breathtaking subtlety. She starts sending her own missionaries. Not to convert, no, that would be too simple. She sends spiritual diplomats, people who understand both Catholic ritual and ancestral wisdom. They arrive in villages with crucifixes in one hand and sacred herbs in the other. They bless with holy water and burn protective incense in the same breath. It's confusing to outsiders. To locals, it makes perfect sense. Nzinga isn't choosing sides between traditions. She's blending them, building a spiritual system that reflects the kingdom itself. Adaptable, fierce, uncolonized. You see it in her court. There's a new altar there now, half made of Portuguese stone, half carved from local wood. On it rests a Bible, a calabash of wine, a bundle of feathers, and a Portuguese map torn precisely down the center. She nods to it every time she enters. Not reverently, just intentionally. One evening, she invites you to walk with her through the outer gardens, overgrown now, lush with creeping vines and stubborn flowers. "Do you think they understand me?" she asks. You hesitate. She grins. "Good. I hope not." You ask her why she's kept, playing both sides all this time. She stops walking, picks a flower, holds it to the light. "Because if they can't name me," she says, "they can't bury me." And that's the truth at the core of it all. Nzinga doesn't just want to win. She wants to be unsimplifiable. And you begin to understand. Her long game isn't about gold or land or even reputation. It's about becoming unerasable. She wants them to try to tell her story and fail to make it fit because she was a queen, a warrior, a diplomat, a trickster, a believer, a blasphemer, a ghost. Try putting that on a plaque. The air is thicker now, not just with humidity, but with memory. It clings to you like the smoke from last night's fire, soft and stubborn. And Nzinga walks slowly these days, not from weakness, but from something more deliberate. as if each step matters, as if she's pacing herself for something that doesn't quite have a name yet. She's in her 60s now, older than most people in this world ever get, older than most of her enemies live to be. Her hair is streaked with silver, but her eyes are still sharp, dark, always watching, and today she's looking west toward Ndongo, the land of her birth, the throne that was once hers, the kingdom she defended, lost, and carried in her bones across every mile of Matamba. And now she wants it back, not as a military conquest. She's done with blood for now. This is something different, something quieter. She's laying the groundwork for what will become her most surprising final act. Diplomacy without compromise. You sit with her as she drafts letters, delicate things, full of veiled threats and gentle invitations, not to the Portuguese themselves, but to their increasingly tired allies. She writes in careful Portuguese, then has it translated into Kimbundu, then reads both aloud to check for tone. She is speaking to two audiences, those in power and those who will soon be. Ndongo, under Portuguese control, is crumbling. Poor leadership, infighting. The puppet governors have no roots in the land. The people are restless, tired of taxes, tired of foreign priests who can't pronounce their names and rules written by men who've never planted a yam. Nzinga knows this, and she knows timing, so she sends emissaries, not soldiers, dignitaries, healers, teachers, women with quiet voices and deep histories. They bring food, not weapons. They bring songs, not ultimatums, and something begins to shift. Villages that once turned away strangers now open their gates to Nzinga's envoys. Old families that once feared her name begin whispering it with hope again. Portuguese outposts grow nervous. Their trade slows. Their maps grow outdated. Nzinga waits. Historians still debate whether she truly intended to retake Ndongo or simply wanted to restore her name to its soil. But one thing is certain. By the time the Portuguese consider reasserting full control, it's already too late. The land remembers her, and she's not coming back with a sword. She's coming back with ceremony. One late afternoon, you ride with her to a high ridge that overlooks the Kwanza River, wide and slow now, like an old man telling a familiar story. She dismounts with a grunt, more tired than she'll admit, and sits on a flat rock. You sit beside her. Below, in the haze of distance, the hills of Ndongo shimmer. She points. There, she says. That's where I first watched a storm roll in. Thought the gods were arguing. She laughs softly. You ask her what it feels like, to come full circle. She's quiet for a long time. Then she says, it doesn't feel like a circle. It feels like I never left. I just took the long way home. The next few weeks are filled with small rituals, meetings with provincial chiefs, letters exchanged with Portuguese governors, now too nervous to be smug. Trade agreements renegotiated on her terms. Ceremonies performed to cleanse sacred sites long neglected. It's not flashy, but it's historic. And Nzinga, in her twilight years, is moving the world once more, but with her voice instead of her spear. She sits on a mat one evening as children sing the old songs, their voices high and clear. She corrects a lyric softly, just one word. The children nod solemnly. The story must be right. That's how memory survives. And then she tells a story of her own, about a girl who once got lost chasing fireflies through cassava fields. How she stumbled into the river and came out holding a fish. How no one believed her. But she wasn't. Wet. And the fish bit a priest. And everyone remembered it differently. The children laugh. She smiles. You remember the funny stories, she says. That's how you remember the rest. Later that night, she writes one last letter to the Portuguese governor. It is diplomatic, polite, firm. It reminds him that peace is always preferable, but never assumed. It reminds him that Matamba is strong, and that Ndongo is healing. It closes with a line that you will never forget. You've spent many years trying to shape my legacy. Let me help. No threats, no declarations, just a queen who's seen the end of many empires and intends to outlive them all. The morning is soft, clouds hang low, and the sun rises slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the hush that blankets the royal compound. Birds chirp in the distance, the rhythmic sweep of brooms brushing dirt into patterns, and somewhere nearby, water boils over a cook fire. It is an ordinary morning, except for the fact that Nzinga is smiling. Not the diplomatic smile, not the calculated, court-polished kind. This one's different, slower, private. The kind that makes her guards pretend not to notice. Because today, for the first time in a long time, she's not preparing for war. She's preparing for legacy. You watch as she settles into a chair on the veranda. A simple carved piece with woven reed backing. Not a throne. She sits with a blank scroll in front of her. Beside her, ink, palm wine, and a stack of letters bundled in faded cloth. You ask what she's doing. Teaching, she says. And you realize this is what her reign has built toward. Not just survival, not just resistance, but succession. Nzinga begins dictating her philosophies, not in the language of empires, but in the language of women who've held both blades and babies, who've built cities from refugee camps, who've traded goods and gods and still made dinner by moonlight. She speaks of negotiation, not as performance, but as instinct. She speaks of enemies, not as monsters, but as men who mistake paperwork for power. She speaks of war, not as glory, but as regret's first cousin. And she speaks of peace, not as a prize, but as something you make with your own hands again and again, like grinding cassava or fixing that one roof beam the rains always find. Her scribes capture every word. Sometimes she stops mid-sentence and rewrites. Sometimes she goes off script and talks to no one in particular. To ancestors, maybe, or to herself, or to you. You know, she says, eyes squinting into the middle distance. They'll try to tidy me up. You tilt your head. They'll want to make me fit into a chapter or a statue or a moral, something with edges. She chuckles. But I was never built for edges. And she goes back to dictating. Later that day, she calls her generals. Not all of them, just the next generation. Young, eager, skeptical. They file into her chamber, expecting instructions, strategy, maybe a warning. She gives them none of that. Instead, she listens, asks what they've seen, what they're afraid of, what they think she got wrong. They hesitate, of course. Who wouldn't? But eventually, one speaks, then another. Then the room fills, not with rebellion, but with realness. Nzinga doesn't argue. She nods, takes notes, pushes back only where it matters. Then she does something unexpected. She begins handing things over. Not everything, just pieces, territories, responsibilities, embassies. It's not abdication, it's rehearsal. Historians still puzzle over this part of her reign. Was it succession planning? Retirement? Delegation? Some call it weakness. Others say it was her greatest strength, the ability to know when to hold power tightly and when to teach others how to carry it without breaking. You see it clearly. Nzinga is not preparing to leave. She's preparing for what comes after. That night, she gathers her closest circle. Kifunji is there too, still quiet, still composed. There's a calm between them now. Not a healing of old wounds, but a kind of coexisting forgiveness, like vines growing on opposite walls of the same house. Nzinga raises her cup. To the ones who will outlive me, she says. Not because I want to be gone, but because I want them to know how to stay. She drinks. Everyone else follows. You sit beside her as the fire dies down, and she says, softly, "I used to think I had to outsmart them." You nod. "But I only had to outlast them." You ask her if that's the same thing. She shrugs. "Depends. Who writes the ending?" You stay up late with her, just watching the stars, listening to the wind move through the trees. There's no urgency tonight, no battles to plan, no speeches to give, just the hum of a life lived wide and the rustling sound of someone gently placing the future into other people's hands. You wake to the sound of wind stirring cloth, not banners. Those have been taken down for cleaning. Not tents. They're packed away from the rains. Just simple, hanging linens, flapping gently across doorways like whispers on a thread. Nzinga is already awake. She's walking the outer paths of the compound alone. No guards, no fanfare, just a long walking stick and the steady rhythm of someone with somewhere to go, even if it's just a loop through memory. Her footsteps are deliberate, now, not because she's frail, but because she's careful. She's always been careful. That's how she lived this long. That's how she's still here when most of her enemies have become names in someone else's footnotes. She pauses at the sight of the first council chamber. The floor's still there, flattened by years of debates, arguments, silences. She brushes her hand over the stone, doesn't say a word. Doesn't need to, because this part of her life is becoming a museum, not one with ropes and labels, but one that lives in gestures and habits, and that certain way the light hits the courtyard at dusk. Back in the main hall, the archivists are assembling her letters. Hundreds of them. Agreements, invitations, complaints, prayers, notes to her generals, lists of which foods to serve, which envoys, apologies written in code, threats written in perfume. She reread some of them slowly, lips barely moving. Then she burns two. You don't ask which ones. Later, she holds court, one final time, not to settle disputes, not to discuss strategy. This time it's just to speak. The room is full. Every stool taken. Some people stand, some crouch. The children, too, are allowed in. Even the ones who've never seen a Portuguese soldier, especially them. She begins not with a speech, but a question. What do you think my enemies will say about me when I'm gone? The room stirs. No one answers. Nzinga continues. They'll say I was cruel, that I lied, that I switched sides, that I drank too much, that I killed too quickly, that I negotiated too slowly, that I should have been a man, a beat. Then, they'll say anything that keeps them from admitting I beat them. Silence. She leans forward, just enough that everyone tilts toward her instinctively. I want you to remember what I did, but I want you to remember why I did it more. She gestures around the room. This wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was work. Every hour, every doubt, every cup of wine poured after a night with no sleep. Every betrayal I survived and forgave just enough to keep moving. Historians still try to figure out what this final court session was. Was it her goodbye? A lesson? A test? Maybe it was all of those. Maybe it was none. But it echoes. For weeks afterward, the people repeat her phrases. The children turn them into songs. Elders recite them during cooking. Warriors scratch them into shields. Not because she told them to, but because they heard them. That's how Nzinga moves now. Not through action, but through echo. Still, she continues her routines. She rises early, walks the perimeter, speaks softly to the guards, checks on the garden with the medicinal herbs. She shares fewer meals, sleeps a little more, but never stops watching, never stops listening. And one night, as the wind rises again and the leaves rattle like old songs, she tells you something she hasn't told anyone. I don't dream of peace anymore. You turn to her. I dream of being misunderstood, You raise an eyebrow. She smirks. Because that means they're still trying to figure me out. She leans back, resting against a carved beam. If I'm lucky, she says, they'll still be guessing in 100 years. You look at her then, not as a queen or a legend or even a person, but as something else. A storm that has learned how to become a sky. And you know, deep down, that she's right. They'll never fully understand her, because Nzinga wasn't built to be understood. She was built to endure. The moon tonight is unusually full, hanging low in the sky like a golden plate someone forgot to clear from the royal table. You and Nzinga sit under its glow on a stone bench, watching moths circle the lanterns and listening to the night breathe. She's quieter these days. Not withdrawn, just settled. Like a story near its final paragraph, aware of its weight and pacing the ending with care. She still oversees council meetings, still signs off on decisions, but increasingly, she lets others speak. First and longer. She corrects less, delegates more, not from disinterest, from intent. She's not stepping away from power, she's teaching others how to hold it. And tonight, she calls for something unusual. A night court, not for legal disputes, for stories. The court gathers in the open courtyard, lit by torches and fireballs. Mats are spread across the ground. Children are allowed to stay up late. Even the guards relax their stances. Nzinga sits cross-legged, a cup of palm wine in her hand, the rim worn smooth from years of use. When she speaks, her voice is soft, but it carries. Tell me a lie, she says, and make it true. At first, people laugh nervously, but then a woman stands and begins, a tale of a man who swallowed the moon to keep it safe, a tale of a snake who cried because no one ever stepped on it by accident, a tale of a child who ran so far from home, they circled the earth and found it again. One by one, the court follows suit. Nzinga listens, eyes half closed, smiling at the odd parts, nodding at the sad ones. And when it's her turn, she doesn't tell a tale. She just says, "They will say I ruled with fear. That's not true." She pauses. "I ruled with memory, and most people are afraid of remembering." No one speaks after that. The fire crackles. A distant owl calls. The night court disperses slowly. Later, alone, Nzinga walks to the ancestral altar. Not to pray, not to confess, just to sit. She lights a small bowl of herbs. The smoke rises slowly, curling toward the stars. You sit beside her, and for a long time, neither of you speaks. Then she says, "When I die, don't let them make a statue." You raise an eyebrow. She continues, "They'll make me look noble, symmetrical. They'll carve out the laughter lines, soften the eyes, dress me like a ghost of someone who never scared anyone." You ask what she wants instead. "A bench," she says. You blink. "A simple one, in the shade, somewhere near the river." You ask why. "So people will sit and wonder," she replies. "That's all I ever wanted, for them to wonder how someone like me could ever have existed." Historians still don't know what Nzinga's final weeks were like. Some say she faded quietly. Others claim she spoke of battle until the end. There are conflicting reports, scattered journals, a few translated whispers. But you know, you were there. You saw the way she prepared not for death, but for legacy. The way she turned her final days into a soft, deliberate campaign, not of resistance, but of remembrance. She gathered her nieces and nephews, told them stories in half-finished thoughts, drew maps in the dirt, then erased them, taught them how to listen, not just how to lead. You walked with her through the old forest path, where she paused to touch every tree that had grown since she'd last been there. She named them, whispered names only she understood. She handed you one of her journals, blank pages left at the back. Fill the rest, she said, but don't use my voice, use yours. And that night, while Matamba slept under a curtain of stars, she sat up late by the fire, not talking, not planning, just existing, not as Queen Nzinga, not as Angola, just as herself. And somehow, that was enough. The morning she doesn't wake, the sky is unusually still. No breeze, no birdsong, just the hush that wraps a place where something important has just passed through. Like the air itself has paused to pay its respects. She's in her bed, though that word feels too small. It's a resting place, a carved frame surrounded by mats and flowers and cloths embroidered with stories. She lies there peacefully, hands folded, a faint smile on her lips. There is no panic, no loud cries, just movement, quiet, intentional. The palace knows, the kingdom knows. Word spreads not with shouts, but with stillness. People stop mid-task, mid-conversation, mid-step. They turn toward the horizon, toward the roads she once walked, the rivers she once named, the winds that still carry her voice. She is gone, but only from the body. The funeral begins before sundown, not because there is urgency, but because tradition demands dusk. You stand among her people, soldiers, farmers, dancers, diplomats. Some weep, some sing. Some just stare at the ground, unsure how to say goodbye to someone they were never quite sure they fully understood in the first place. She is carried not in a casket, but on a platform covered in woven reeds and feathers. Her weapons are displayed beside her, sheathed. Her wine gourd rests at her feet, still full. A mask sits above her head, carved from blackwood, blank but dignified. There are no official speeches, only stories. Everyone tells one. The old general who once rode with her through flooded trails. The cook who remembered how she used to sneak second portions of roasted plantain. The court scribe who swore she could recite treaties backward while holding a sword in her other hand. Even Kifunji speaks, her voice barely above a whisper. Just a few words. She was impossible, she says. And I'm so glad I lived in her wake. When the stories are done, they light the fires. No burial, no tomb. As she requested, there will be no statue. Instead, they spread her ashes along the riverbank, under trees that remember her footprints. The bench she asked for is built a few weeks later. Simple, shaded. No plaque. But sometimes, people find things left there. Beads, cups of wine, feathers, folded scraps of cloth with prayers stitched in the corners. No one ever admits who places them, and that's how Nzinga lives on. Not in a crown, but in a gesture. Not in stone, but in the pause. Before someone says, but what if we did it differently? Because Nzinga was never meant to be easy to define. She was meant to be remembered in motion, in resistance, in reinvention, in the soft, steady voice that reminds you a throne is only a seat until someone sits in it like they belong. And she always belonged, even when they said she didn't, especially then. So rest now, close your eyes. Picture her walking, barefoot, smiling, sipping something stronger than history can hold. She's ahead of you again. But she always made room for those who followed, and now that Nzinga's journey has reached its final chapter, take a slow breath. Let the story settle into you. Not like a burden, but like warmth. The kind of warmth that comes from knowing someone once held the world together. One decision at a time. One whispered instruction. One sip of palm wine. Maybe you can feel the quiet now. Not silence. Just peace. The kind she fought so long to make. Maybe you picture that bench, the one beneath the trees. Maybe you imagine yourself sitting there, watching the river move, knowing she once stood on its banks and didn't flinch when the storms came. And maybe that's enough tonight. You don't have to remember every date, every detail, just the feeling, the sense of someone who twisted fate into something that looked, for a moment, like justice, who built a kingdom out of people, not stones, who didn't need to be remembered as perfect, just as real. So let your breath slow. Let your shoulders fall just a little heavier into the bed or chair or floor you're resting on. Let your eyes drift, maybe closed, maybe not, and know that while the world is noisy, fast, relentless, there are still stories like this, stories that end, not with a bang, but with a whisper. She was here, and so are you. Good night.